Morning, Ivor. How are you? You've forgotten to unmute, but I can see you are responding to me. Are you indicating that we are ready to start? Can you please unmute yourself? Good morning. How are you?
Good. I'm well, thank you. Have I done that?
Yes,
I have
you
to
did.
get used to the technology. All right. Super, super. This is good. This is novel for me, so forgive me. Are we all ready? I see Philip
Yes,
is
I
there.
am ready
Correct?
on my side.
All right. So let's.
I'll await an indication from you.
No, I think let's start. I see Philip is there, and Philip can go first, and then the minister, then Vali Musa can join us when he joins us. I got an email from him this morning saying that just confirming everything. So I think we're all good to go.
Well, I am here, Ivor.
Oh, hi. Good morning.
I've been waiting for a long time.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very
Okay.
sorry. Okay,
Right.
well, we're ready to go. So, Councillor, let's start.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think let me start by greeting all the esteemed guests, with the special mention, of course, to our keynote speakers, Vali Musa and Mr. Philip Brainfeld. There are members of the SALGA NEC who are here. Also the ministry, I'm told, will be joining us as well. I'm not sure if I'm right, but I see members from MISA as well. There are some mayors and executive mayors, speakers and chief whips, members of the mayoral committees who are designated by their executive mayors and mayors, municipal demarcation board, municipal managers and CFOs, local government practitioners in general. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. Over the past few months, we have had to deal with the gaping reality, which we all know, that we faced from COVID-19. And we know now it has brought society great harm, and to families as a whole, and a country and a nation and the whole world. Not only has this pandemic impacted on every person, sector, business, culture, religion, and our entire way of life, but as a people we have to mourn differently as we lay to rest many of those who were closest to us. However, as South Africans, we have learned to endure, survive, and be resilient as always. More so, we have become accustomed to the new way of doing things. This morning is just but evident to that. We could be able to pull the entire sector to celebrate and inspire one another as local government practitioners in a new virtual way of hosting a virtual conference. The months of November and December this year are of critical importance in the local government calendar celebrations. Firstly, the 1st of November 1995 being the first municipal elections, and secondly, the 5th of December 2000 being the first democratic municipal elections. Both these elections brought so much optimism about developmental potential of municipalities. 25 years and 20 years later, respectively, public perception of local government, unfortunately, is at an all-time low. With the 2021 municipal elections approaching steadily next year, much needs to be done to profile local government and to make it a better area of government. As such, this event, being in line with our 25-year celebration, is a very useful opportunity to reflect on the gains made for the 20-25 years by local government over the past 25 years, and indeed to honestly interrogate if the assumptions made on the functioning of local government still hold water, are they still true today, or whether some change and adjustment is required. We are immensely proud today that we are keeping in with the Constitution and the spirit of cooperative governance. We have participants from all spheres, as I indicated earlier, of local government practitioners, and very key stakeholders and partners from the private sector, who are all interested in making sure that our people get and receive better from municipalities and a sphere that is closer to them and is designed to serve them. And it is with this spirit that all of us combined this morning jointly need to deliberate and find answers, because the answers that we possess we will only transfer them to the betterment of the service of our people. Without any further delay, Chair, let me welcome you to this 25th year of local government celebrations, and also look forward to the fruitful deliberations, which, as I say, will not only build us in attendance here, but will build the entire world to ensure that no one is left behind and everyone receives better services from government. Thank you very much.
Councillor, thank you very much. We can move straight to our into the keynote addresses. I just wanted to say on behalf of GAPP, a great welcome to everybody, and Control-Alt-Delete, the initiative that has put this event together. We're very excited by the program and by the group of people that have joined us to participate. For me, this is also a personal moment. It's 24 years since the white paper on local government, which I was very involved in preparing. And of course, 25 years since the first local government election. A lot of water has passed under the bridge in that time, some good, a lot not so good. It's a great opportunity now as we prepare for the next local government elections and prepare for what we hope in South Africa will be a period of renewal, to start thinking around some of the basic assumptions that informed the model of local government that we developed after apartheid, to think of what we got right and what we got wrong, to initiate some, or think around some potential program of reform. That's all I want to say. Again, I welcome everybody, and we can move on to the keynote speakers. We've got two great keynote speakers, Philip van Reineveld, who was involved right at the beginning, and I think we'll speak a little bit about his involvement in preparing the first document on behalf of the ANC around local government, and in my mind is the kind of transition point between the work that was being done in Clan Act in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and work in the African National Congress. And of course, we then have Minister Vali Musa, who was key to that process as well, sharing his experiences and insights. So I'll move according to the agenda. So Philip, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Ivor, and welcome to everyone, wherever you may be. I haven't quite mastered this background, so I'm afraid you've got some background here, but hopefully that's okay. So I really am very grateful to SALGA and GAPP for arranging this conference, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have to say. And obviously, while it'd be nicer to be doing this all in person, this virtual format means probably that more people can participate than would otherwise be the case. So thank you, GAPP. Thank you, SALGA. I think this is a really great initiative. And I do believe that we are at an important juncture of renewal, significantly enabled by the election of Cyril Ramaphosa as president of the country. And while we should not underestimate what has been achieved, it's probably fair to say that most of us feel that local government is not living up to the dreams we had 25 years ago. I was struck by a paragraph written yesterday by Stephen Grootes in an article in the Daily Maverick, where he said in passing, the article wasn't about local government, but he said in passing, it's well known that municipalities cannot manage their money and that there is widespread corruption within them. The former Auditor General, Kimi Makwetu, said in his final report that the safe and clean hands that can be relied upon to look after the public's finances in local government are few and far between. So that's from Stephen Grootes yesterday in the Daily Maverick. There is a tendency to write off local government as a whole when the picture is more mixed. And at the risk of being guilty of whataboutism, one might also point out that there are failures across all spheres of government, especially national entities directly responsible for service delivery, such as PRASA, and many provincial departments. But what we are now seeing is a dangerous cycle of decline in local government, where poor performance is leading to decreased trust in local government, a loss of relative power, and consequently, I would say, an unwillingness amongst capable people to join local government as politicians or officials. This is leading to further deterioration in performance with significant adverse consequences for the country. And local government is critical. It's the sphere of government that most affects our everyday lives. It affects how our neighborhoods function. It is absolutely critical to the management of the core areas of our economy, as well as other towns and districts. And while provinces play an important role in education and health, they're not as key to essential services and what I would call the patterns of everyday life in the way that local government is. And although I'm not advocating it, one could perhaps envisage a country without provincial government, without provincial governments, but one could not envisage a country without local governments. So local government is absolutely critical, but this conference needs to be honest about where we are and hopefully help chart our way to a better future. But as I've said at the beginning, this conference is about both looking back and looking forward. So I'm going to kick off with some history and start by going back to a document that was produced 28 years ago in October 1992. It was a discussion document called ANC Regional Policy, and it was jointly compiled by the ANC's Constitutional Committee and the ANC's Department of Local Government and Local and Regional Government and Housing in preparation for constitutional negotiations. It was distributed across all branches in October of that year, 1992, and in November, the ANC held a special National Consultative Conference on Regional Policy in Johannesburg, where this policy was adopted. It was one of only two policies, I think, officially adopted by the ANC between 1990 and 1996. Until a few years ago, it was available on the ANC website with all the other official ANC documents dating back to the party's founding. Unfortunately, the old website closed down and a lot of important material is no longer available online. It was called regional policy because at the time there was disagreement between what the second level of government should be called. The old National Party wanted this level of government to be called states, and the ANC wanted them to be called regions. So the compromise was province. And for those you remember, there were many documents at the time that used to refer to SPRs, which meant stood for states, provinces, and regions. The ANC had not really anticipated being drawn so early into the debate on decentralization. And many initially thought this should be left to a constituent assembly after democratic elections. But as negotiations advanced, it became clear that it was going to be necessary to try to come to some kind of agreement amongst the key parties before the first democratic election. There is no doubt in my mind that the clarity of thinking that was forced upon the ANC through the negotiation process, underpinned by the tone set by Oliver Tambo, that it was necessary to win the arguments and not just the power, was critical in producing a constitution that is highly regarded all over the world. The agreements in the early negotiations became codified in what were called the constitutional principles, which both the interim constitution of 1993 and the final constitution of 1996 had to comply with. And they included the principle that there be 3 levels of government. In the decentralization debate, most intellectual activity in the ANC was focused on local government, bolstered by the very localized community organizations and activism that had underpinned the United Democratic Front. So it was to this group of people that the ANC turned to help draft a policy, a technical document on decentralization. And important in this regard was a project based at the University of Western Cape called Logo Pop. And a number of people in this conference, I'm sure, will remember that. A number of you in this conference were involved in that, and I was part of that as well. The ANC was very wary of provinces, but the multiple civic organizations organized through the UDF were committed to local democracy. It was accepted fairly early on by the ANC that a constitutional dispensation would need to have an intermediate level of government between national and local, but sought an arrangement that was sometimes characterized from a powers and functions perspective as strong national, weak provinces, and strong local. Meanwhile, the old National Party, knowing that they were not going to win a national election, but hoping that it could win power at provincial level in combination with some of the old homeland leaders, wanted weak, strong, and were not too clear about the third level. I think some people in the ANC who were not so committed to local government nevertheless found it useful when the National Party accused the ANC of centralizing power and called for decentralization. They found it useful that the ANC was able to respond that actually the National Party's decentralization did not go far enough. There were a number of important policy positions adopted through this process, of which I'm going to mention 3, which played a significant role in shaping the current constitutional dispensation. Firstly, while the discussion document presented 2 different proposals on regional or provincial boundaries, the conference adopted a 10-region model, which offered a basis for agreeing around the boundaries of the current 9 provinces. And I'll come to the other boundary proposal in a moment. Secondly, the document had quite a strong focus on the idea of metropolitan government. While metropolitan governments were not directly written into the Constitution, this is where the idea first got properly established within the ANC in this document in 1992. Thirdly, the document set out an approach to intergovernmental fiscal arrangements, which is largely what we have in the Constitution today, which was referred to in the document as the Finance and Resources section. And in the documentation introducing this conference, there's some discussion about the model of local self-financing. So I'm just quickly going to read you a bit of what the 1992 policy document said in the Finances and Resources chapter. And it reads like this: an emphasis on local control. The starting point should be a strong emphasis upon the need to strengthen local control over the use of public resources. This helps to ensure that usage is efficiently and appropriately tailored to local conditions. The link between paying taxes and receiving public services must be recognized as an important element in the strengthening of democratic accountability and is most direct at the local level. But then it went on to say, however, there are substantial constraints on the extent to which the fiscal system can be decentralized. And much of the rest of the chapter is on those constraints, including the following. The level of inequality in the country compromises the extent to which accountability can be based on a direct relationship between payment of taxes and the receipt of public services. Thus, more important than the call for one city, one tax base, which was the motto of the time, is the need for one country, one tax base. In other words, the document was arguing that the basis for redistribution has to be national. And the document then went on to explain that there was a need for substantial fiscal transfers from the center, and inter alia proposed the Fiscal and Financial Commission as one of a number of mechanisms aimed at ensuring fairness and predictability in the distribution of grants from the center. So that's where that idea of the Financial and Fiscal Commission comes from. It's actually in that document. The debate on provincial boundaries was interesting. There was a group in favor of the 9 or 10, but another group, of which I was a part, wanted the second tier to consist of 30 or 40 regions, or we actually called them districts. There were 2 arguments. One was that districts were a more suitable scale of government for developmental purposes. And the other was that the metros needed to be regions in their own right so that they could have a direct relationship with national. The ANC leadership, and this was told to me by Albie Sachs at the time, was concerned that a 30-region approach would keep the old homelands alive. So that option got reconfigured into 16 regions, which was basically the 10-region approach, but with the metros being regions in their own right. So that was the other proposal. In the document, 2 proposals, a 10-region proposal and a 16-region proposal, And the 16 regions proposal essentially made the metros regions in their own right. But despite the ANC winning the argument and establishing a constitution that is based on strong, weak, strong in terms of powers, I would argue that this has been countered since 1994 by what I would call the provincialization of political parties, including the ANC. And nationally, this has had two effects. It's created a significant disconnect between political governance and the economy, and it has weakened local government. And it's interesting to try to understand the dynamics here. So firstly, while the Constitution is organized on the basis of spheres, which is aimed at making relationships non-hierarchical, especially between provincial and local government, political parties are organized as tiers in a hierarchical way. This is probably a natural response. It seems counterintuitive for somebody responsible over a small area to be more important than somebody responsible over a bigger area, even if the responsibilities over the smaller area are more intense. But I was surprised at how much more prominence and importance the ANC gave to provincial representatives than it did to local ones. And I believe this was actually a significant mistake. I once challenged Trevor Manuel at a public meeting on it when he was Minister of Finance. And I remember that at the time, there was only one local government office holder on the whole 110-person national NEC. And that person was Amos Masondo, who was then mayor of Johannesburg. 1 out of 110. And there is a very interesting contrast, and I want to bring a sort of an international perspective, a very interesting contrast with China here. China has provinces, but its 4 biggest cities are treated as provinces in their own right. They're the cities of Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, and Chongqing. They're in fact not referred to as provinces, but as directly administered municipalities. And in fact, the path to the highest office in the land tends to be through these municipalities. The highest decision-making body in the Chinese Communist Party is the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which usually has between 5 and 11 members. It's not been unusual for the political leaders of all these 4 cities to be members of this small standing committee that sits at the apex of political power in China. Both the current General Secretary, Xi Jinping, and the previous but one, Jiang Zemin, went directly from being political leader of the city of Shanghai via the Standing Committee to the top position of General Secretary. So a fascinating contrast between the position of cities in China and local government and in South Africa. But to get back to South Africa, the structure of power in the ANC leadership has meant that when anybody wanted to get something adopted or canvass for a position, they would tend to work province by province. This process strengthened provincial figures in the political realm, even if it did not give them more constitutional power. And this intersects with another dimension that is interesting. At the time of the ANC elective conference 2 years ago, I put together a graphic that compared the provinces by proportion of conference delegates, population, and provincial share of domestic product. And I'm actually going to try and share my screen here quickly, because I've got, if I can find the graphic. There you are. Can you see that? Can everyone see that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. And I just need to, right, get my, so what I want you to look at is the slope of the 3 lines in each case. Gauteng slopes sharply up to the right, meaning proportionately it has a higher share of population than delegates. You see, for each of those provinces on the left in blue, and if the color can come through on your screen, on the left in blue is the proportion of conference delegates. The middle block for each of the provinces is the proportion of population, the proportion that that province represents of the whole national population. And the gray block on the right of the three is the provincial share of GDP. So you can see there on the left, the Gauteng province, with a small proportion of delegates, a higher proportion of the country's population, and an even higher share of the economy. So if you look across those different provinces, you'll see there Free State, relatively small population and an equally small share of the economy, but quite a high number of delegates. Mpumalanga with a lot of delegates, smaller population and economy. Limpopo, similarly, more delegates than it has population or economy. Western Cape has a slope similar to Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal is a slight outlier in that actually all three are more or less the same. Eastern Cape is similar to Limpopo and so on, and the Northern Cape. And there you can see the critical delegates from Mpumalanga that at the last moment came in behind Cyril Ramaphosa, leading to his victory by just over 100 votes in the leadership battle. But what I think is also important here is that Gauteng and the Western Cape, which together account for 35.2% of the country's population, and 47.8, nearly half of the country's GDP, had only 14.5% of the delegates, less than 15% of the delegates. So those two provinces, with nearly half the country's economy, over a third of the country's population, had less than 15% of the delegates. So why would the strongest provinces economically, together accounting for nearly half the country's economy, end up with only 14.5% of the delegates? I think part of the answer may lie in the fact that in the urban areas, there's a strong private economy. This means livelihoods are not nearly as dependent upon the state as they are in rural areas. So you can see why it may be easier to mobilize people to join branches in the rural provinces than in the urban areas, and why control over provincial government then becomes so important. From that position alone, in a province, you cannot take national power. But as a coalition of provincial interests, you can do so. And of course, that is what the Premier League was all about. This is a dangerous position for the ANC to be in, when the governance geography of the party is so out of alignment with the geography of the economy. So what we've seen developing over the last decade is a shift in power to a coalition of provincial interests, dominated by people who don't have responsibility for the key areas of the country that drive the economy. And moreover, because of the grant-based funding of the provinces, for which, given the geographic inequality of the country, there's no real alternative to, they have no responsibility to collect taxes. One sees the result of this in many areas. For example, I do a lot of work in public transport these days and have been watching closely the passage of the National Land Transport Amendment Bill. Now, I don't want to pretend that there are easy answers to how transport is governed, but the bill as passed represents a significant and inappropriate provincialization of the public transport sector. The bill was passed by Parliament against the protestations of SALGA, who have now had to petition the president not to sign it on the basis of it being unconstitutional. And SALGA is clearly right about that, and they have strong senior council opinion backing them. This dynamic is not peculiar to the ANC. The DA is also organized in tiers And right now, there are significant attempts to shift transport responsibilities away from the city of Cape Town and to the province of the Western Cape. But this brings me to a further issue that makes things complex for the local government voice, if you like, namely the exceptional nature of Gauteng as an urban province. Because Gauteng is a city region, there are some urban responsibilities that make more sense if they're exercised across the province. Gautrain is an example. You would not want to organize that on a metro level. You can't. On the other hand, so much of public transport is actually about the management of the street, the interface between public transport and the built environment, which is really something that only local governments can do. So Gauteng and its metros need to come to some kind of arrangement on how they do this. But because of the dominance of Gauteng, much of the rest of the country tends to be seen through this same lens. And so, for example, we now see the Western Cape also talking about establishing a provincial transport authority. The fact that 3 of the 5 biggest metros are in an urban province articulating urban issues means that important local voices on urban issues get subsumed under a provincial voice to the detriment of local government more generally. This absence of local voice is seen in many areas. Last month, the Minister of Transport, and I'm giving these transport examples because I'm working in transport, but I'm sure you could find others in the other sectors. But last month, the Minister of Transport held a taxi lekgotla. It was preceded by provincial lekgotlas, with the provincial MECs then invited to participate in the national lekgotla. SALGA was invited, but nobody else from local government. Yet working with the taxi industry means dealing with highly localized dynamics. I cannot see how a coherent reform of the taxi industry can be driven without a significant local government involvement. We need to address these issues. We don't need to change the Constitution. The Constitution is an important instrument for addressing the problems, but we need to think how to reconfigure things better within this context. And in this regard, and I'm looking forward to the discussion on it, I believe the district development model is potentially a very important initiative. And I think we all ought to be engaging with it and helping to shape it in ways that work for the country and work for local government. But the problems of local government are not just attributable to its place within the intergovernmental system. The most important endeavor must be about strengthening local governments themselves institutionally. And I want to close with just a few remarks on that. Over the years, I've come to believe that when you want to assess any organization, you should ask three key things. What is the leadership like? What is the strategy like? What is the ability to implement? And we could spend a whole conference just discussing just these, but let me throw out just a few brief ideas. I'm going to start with strategy. I believe most people in this conference would buy into the idea of community participation and the creation of value through partnership between community and local government. Yet most of our strategies seem to be about delivery to passive recipients, usually with funds collected at the center and often distributed as one form of subsidy or another. These programs themselves are often nationally determined, and because funding is from the center, there is a temptation for national officials to get overly involved in determining the detail of local provision. But this approach often fails to ignite the great potential for bottom-up initiative, which not only delivers resources, but in my view, is the basis of real empowerment. We've actually seen quite a lot of community-driven response to COVID. Some of you may have heard about the community action networks, and in Cape Town, organized through Cape Town Together. In the Cape Town area, the CAN network, which was initiated originally by a small group of friends, managed to tap into a self-organizing dynamic, which snowballed into feeding close to 200,000 people at one stage with minimal government assistance. But what was even more important were the community bonds that were created in the process. We are running into serious obstacles with a delivery from above approach. Not only do we face implementation failures, but the fiscal crisis we are in is more severe than generally recognized. The model whereby successful big business and a small proportion of income earners generated sufficient tax revenues to fund mass delivery is increasingly unsustainable. A few days ago, the Minister of Housing announced that the state would no longer be building houses. It would only be making land available. We will see more of this. A few weeks ago, the Minister of Transport spoke about a massive new subsidization drive for minibus taxis, but I cannot see it happening. There isn't the money. Nor, incidentally, do I think it's actually the right thing to do. The taxi industry needs help to change the way it operates, tapping into its entrepreneurial energy more than it needs subsidies. We will need to learn.
Interrupt and just say, can you start coming to an end soon? It's the session is.
I'm almost finished. We'll need to learn how to support communities in the things that need government intervention and stay out of the things that don't. There's some things I wanted to say about leadership. Broadly in local government, we need to think about both the qualities of leadership we need and the systems and structures that surround leadership, and consider how to improve both. New strategies will need leadership that listens, that can partner with communities, but leadership is difficult and the pressures on leadership are immense. I think a priority is to find ways of better supporting both mayors and municipal managers, including in helping to manage the relationships between the political and the administrative, and then broadening from there. We need leadership at all levels in the administration. And then finally, ability to implement. Good leaders can be found and sound strategies can be developed quite quickly, but the ability to implement requires a deep level of institution building that takes time. Part of the problem is that with the transition to democracy, new leadership was brought in at the top with insufficient appreciation of what lower level jobs were about. But we do now have a severe crisis on our hands of poor implementation. Unfortunately, part of the problem now seems to be that we're trying to address inability to implement with rules and compliance. This will not work. We need capable, motivated people. A culture overly driven by compliance leads to people too afraid to take initiative and ultimately a failure of delivery, with capable people driven away. Instead, we need to foster leadership at all levels within the administrations, and build trust and commitment. We need strong administrators, and we also need people at administrative level who can work responsibly with communities in line with the new strategies I've spoken about. There is a sense in this conference of a re-emergence of people who have felt excluded for much of the last decade. But I really believe that now is the time to make significant advances, and now is the time to get involved. Thanks, Ivor. I'm sorry I went over there. That's sufficient.
A riveting presentation. I think we're going to have to catch up time in the next session. Let's move straight on to Minister Musa, who was, of course, he was the Deputy Minister at the time of the negotiations of constitutional and local government. Minister, over to you, please.
Thank you, Ivor. I'm not a minister, and you get into a lot of trouble with the government if you refer to me as a minister. Just call me Vali if you don't mind. But good morning to everybody. And congratulations on this event. I think it's absolutely wonderful that so many people are getting together to discuss this important question. And Philip, thanks for a riveting presentation, as Ivor said. I think very, very, very interesting indeed. The one thing that struck me when I look at the participants here, because I just got a message, a WhatsApp message from Yunus Karim. He says, you look so old. What are you doing here? And I just wondered, what are all of us doing here? If I think about the period that that Philip has referred to, around 1995 was 25 years ago. And all of you who were the key thinkers at that time are in this conference. And I just wonder whether there are people, there's a new cohort of younger people who are doing the thinking and looking back at what we did and throwing that out. I don't really see that, and it concerns me. Think about if in 1995, we relied on the intellectual abilities of people who were in their prime in 1970. I think we wouldn't have tolerated it at all. And so throughout the leadership in the country, particularly at national level, we've got a huge problem of age. Younger people are not participating in shaping the country currently. And if we look back after a whole generation, one would have assumed that there would have been younger people or just new thinkers who would have looked back at what we did and tried to change a lot of what we did, which needs to be changed. But having said that, and taking account of the time, I want to just comment on 3 areas, a lot of them just practical. But the first is something which Philip already spoke about very eloquently, which is something I wanted to speak about. And that is the disjuncture between the politics of the country and the legal and constitutional state arrangements of the country. There's a huge disjuncture, and it's causing a very big problem. Like some of you, I've attended every single national conference of the ANC, and believe it or not, I still go to I'm a loyal member of the ANC, so I go to all of the conferences. And when you go to a conference of the ANC, in the plenary sessions, it's conducted as follows. Here's an item that we need to take a decision on. We'll have a little bit of discussion, and then we'll have the vote. And the discussion goes as follows. Gauteng province, what's your view? Western Cape province, what's your view? Eastern Cape province, what's your view? Only provinces are allowed to speak. And so the 9 provinces speak, and then the Youth League speaks, and the Women's League speaks, and 1 or 2 other sort of leagues speak. But the elected delegates don't say anything at the thing. And I'm trying to reinforce the point that the ANC has federalized itself almost completely. It runs as a federal institution. We opposed federalism, and we managed to do it quite successfully. We have a unity country, and we have a single economy, and we have a single tax base, and all of those sorts of things. But the ANC itself is run on purely federal lines. That's what it is. And if you want to get anywhere in the ANC, you have to do it through the provinces. And this is quite a big problem, because in terms of governance, provinces are the weakest sphere that we've got, or the weakest level, if one wants to use that term. It has no revenue raising capacity. It hardly has any ability to make laws. If you look at the program and the actual work schedule of the provincial legislatures, most of them do more or less nothing. And people say, oh, well, the provincial legislatures sit for so few days, they pass so few laws. And that's because they don't have anything to do. And that's what it should be. They shouldn't sit around looking for work to do. So they don't have much to do. But in the ANC, it's run through the provincial structures of the ANC. Perhaps it couldn't be any other way, but I think it's a reality that we need to face. And the result of which is that the powerful entities, which are the metros of the country, really the engines of the South African economy, and the social and cultural engines of our country. That's what drives our nation, the metros, in so many different ways. They have no say politically, either in the ANC or, has been pointed out, in any of the other parties either. No say whatsoever. And this is just a fault line. I don't know how it can possibly be addressed, but I have one idea that I have, which I think is going to probably emerge over time, is that the metros would develop a political dynamic of their own. Am I still there? Hello, can you hear me still? Because my screen.
Yes, you are.
Oh, good, good.
Yes, yes, can hear you.
Yes.
So I think the metros will have to develop a political dynamic of their own. And I'm not talking about what we saw recently, where you had the coalition run. 3 of the metros were run on the basis of coalition governments. Maybe that's a sign of what's to come. But I think unless the metros have political authority of their own, we will not be able to realize the full potential of the system that we have. Look at what we've got currently. You've got recently in eThekwini, the mayor gets removed by the premier. But the mayor is supposed to have more power than the premier. It's more important than the premier is, frankly, if you look at it from a constitutional point of view. But these big metros are completely subject to the political authority of the provinces and of national government. And that will have to be broken. And I think it will be broken in some time to come. It's not easy to say how it will happen, but I would like to see the metros being far more assertive and the political leadership in the metros being far more assertive. Just the second point in this regard that I want to make, also the political thing, and that is that Philip makes the point that he had that wonderful graph which shows how Gauteng has so few delegates at the national conference of the ANC, and the smaller provinces more delegates, etc. But if you look, and I'm sure the former statistician general who's with us here will know about it better, that over the past 2 to 3 elections, the ANC started to lose the urban vote very significantly. And the ANC relies largely now on the rural vote, on the non-metro vote. And as we develop further and further, the ANC is going to become more and more of a non-metro supported party. That's what's going to happen, because people in the metro simply are not going to support the ANC that looks like it looks currently. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And this is in keeping with global tendencies. In India, which gained independence around 1950 or so, the Congress Party, which was a sort of the sister party of the ANC, first started losing its support in the cities. It lost Bombay, it lost New Delhi, it lost all of those, but it relied on the huge rural vote, where they could have had the equivalent of our grants and such things. And that kept the Congress Party in power for a long time, but now it's lost party to essentially what's a fascist party. If you look at Boris Johnson, he didn't win London at all. If you look at Trump, he didn't win New York. So in many parts of the world, the big urban conglomerations have a politics of their own, and that's what will develop. I hope it does develop, and I think it's something that we need to encourage. I'm not saying that these entities should not necessarily be within the ANC, for those of you who are ANC supporters, but it could happen within the ANC. I think within parties, the metros need to be far more assertive, and I think they can be. But we've got a big problem the way it's structured. Maybe it's structured like this because in the ANC, because the United Democratic Front was structured along provincial lines, which were called regions. COSATU was always structured in that sort of way, and the ANC, hadn't really thought about how to be structured once it got unbanned, and so it just fell into that. And I think that probably caused the mistake. I want to make 2 practical sort of type comments here. The first is on the question of ethics. Now, the Stephen Groote's quote that we were given is on the lips of everybody. But I would like to assume that the overwhelming majority of councillors who stand for elections and get elected are people who go there because they want to either serve their communities, or they want some kind of political importance, which is not a crime, to be an important person in society. or perhaps, you know, that there's some sort of level of remuneration, etc., and those sorts of things involved. But very few people go into the council, and for that matter into provincial and national legislatures, with the intention of stealing public money. There's very few people who do that. There are some people who go into politics because they think it will advantage them. They will be able to do crooked things and get rich quick. But those are very few and very brave people, because it takes enormous bravery, I would assume, if you want to go down that path. But then when people get elected, we leave them to the wolves, because the private sector people are circling our public representatives all the time. If you become the chairperson of a transport committee in a metro or council or in the National Assembly, then the transport companies will start whining and dining you. And before you know what it was, they've got you on a hook. They've got you compromised. They've given you money without asking for any favors. You didn't think that if somebody gives you money without asking for a bribe, that it's illegal. And then you go into that and you get caught into this kind of a web. And where we fail, I think, as a leadership of society, is that our public representatives do not undergo any training and education on ethics at all. And this is a weird thing, because we are generally, unlike what people think, we're quite a well-regulated society. Take, for example, chartered accountants. They need to go for annual upgrading and training, including ethics training. If they don't do that, they can get struck off from working as auditors and such things. Anybody in a medical profession has to earn something like 300 continuous development points of accredited training every year. Part of that includes medical ethics. And if you don't do that, you will not be able to work as a doctor or a physiotherapist or such things. Or if you take, lots of professions have that kind of thing. You know, it's part of how South Africa works.